Good afternoon, folks. Mr. Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for the kind introduction. Kelly, thank you for everything you do for this state. I'm such a fan of the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, and I want to thank the conservative group as well for bringing me here to talk about what's happening. You know, Kelly, when you said that sometimes you don't agree with your wife, I almost never agree with my wife, and we've remained married. So I have to say, I haven't been able to stop smiling for the last 10 days. Ever since that election, it was an incredible election for conservatives. And, I know that this is a lot of Democrats. Raise your hand if you're a Democrat in this room, because I know there are a lot of Democrats, and I so much appreciate your all being here. And I would make the case to you that this election that we just saw was not a victory for the Republican Party. It was not. It was a victory for the conservative movement and the free market principles that we all agree with, and those are bipartisan ideas. And so, if I say anything at all to offend any Democrat in this room, I assure you it's not my intention. I mean, I'm still mad at Republicans for getting us in this crisis in the first place. So I want to say that at the outset. I do work at the Wall Street Journal. How many of you read the Wall Street Journal editorial page? Thank you so much for helping pay my salary. It is a great newspaper. Of the 5 major newspapers in the country, only the Wall Street Journal has an increase in circulation, and I have some good news. I have some other good news, which is that the New York Times is about this close to needing a federal bailout. So couldn't happen to a nicer group of people, right? And then I also, you probably know we have a strategic partnership now, obviously with Fox News, because Rupert Murdoch owns the Journal. And how many of you watch Fox News at night? A lot of you do. I was, Kelly, you'll get a kick out of this. I was in Dallas about a week ago, and I was walking through the airport, and this lovely little old lady, she just ran up to me, and she threw her arms around me, and she was so excited. It was very endearing. She said, are you the one I see on Fox News? And I said, well, ma'am, I think I am. I said, do you watch Fox News a lot? She said, do I watch Fox News a lot? She said, I don't even know how to change the channel on my TV. And there are so many people who think that way now. It was a great election. I wanted to just mention one thing, and this is going to sound a little partisan, but I just have to tell you all that, I'm originally from Chicago, and so I called my mom on election night. She still lives in Chicago. And I said, Mom, this is such a great election on the East Coast. It looks like, they're going to be just big gains for conservatives all in these East Coast states. And she said, Steve, it's the same way here in Illinois. She said, it's such a good night that even the dead people in Chicago are voting Republican. And that doesn't happen very often. So, all right, well, what Kelly asked me to talk about is what steps can now be taken in the state of Georgia to make this, I think you put it so well, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, not just the capital of the South, but the free enterprise capital of this country. And I think Georgia is in such an excellent condition, and you have such an opportunity to do that now. And my advice to you is do not fritter away this opportunity. The voters have given you a mandate now to make major changes, to make this what I call a high-octane economic growth state. Now I'm going to say something really radical, and where's my friend Joe McCutcheon? Joe, there you are. I hope I don't offend you with this because it's pretty radical, but step one, and I'm serious about this, I'm deadly serious, the most important step you could do to make Georgia a pro-economic growth state that is just a magnet for jobs, so you see your unemployment rate fall by half. Abolish the state income tax, and do it right now. Now, I know there are some people who say, I see there may be a few people in the back who are having cardiac arrest over this idea. I mean, how could we possibly pay our bills? This is not a radical idea, is it, Joe? This is not a radical idea. There are 9 states in this country that have no income tax. Those are states like Texas. Florida, obviously, your neighbor. Tennessee has no income tax. New Hampshire has no income tax. Nevada has no income tax. Washington State has no income tax. And these states are able to pay their bills without having an income tax. Now, here's what's interesting. If you look at the evidence, it is so abundantly clear that the states without an income tax are the states that have driven job creation and growth and businesses. And there's just no question about it. You know, if you compare, especially if you compare those 9 states with those the states that have the highest income tax, states like California and New York and New Jersey and Massachusetts, there's just no question about it. Jobs and businesses are leaving those high growth areas and they're moving to California. And by the way, I mean, I don't want to pick on my friends on the left coast, but can you believe California? They just reelected Governor Moonbeam. I mean, these people just don't get it. But this provides an opportunity to literally take jobs from many of these other states and bring them to the great state of Georgia. You know, there's a saying now that has a lot of truth to it, that Texas is the new California. Have you all heard that? Texas is the new California? And it is real. You know, Scott Hodges here, who you're going to hear from later today, who's got all of these statistics. But you just see what's happening day after day after day, that jobs are leaving California and they're going to states like Texas because it's such a pro-business, low-tax environment. This can be done. It can be in a way to increase your consumption taxes a bit, to replace the income tax with these other taxes. But I think it would just be an explosively pro-growth thing. Another point I wanted to make, you know, I've been around just in the last 3 or 4 weeks, I've been to probably about 15 states. I've been all over the place. And just this past week, I was in Birmingham, Alabama. I was in South Carolina. I was in North Carolina. And one of the things that's so interesting, I mean, is that this election that happened on Tuesday has brought amazing gains of conservatives around the country. And so, for example, if you look at what happened nationwide, this is a story that didn't get told enough, is that Republicans around the country picked up 680 legislative seats. I know you had big pickups in the state of Georgia, but it happened everywhere. I mean, Alabama is a good example. Alabama is a state that has not had a Republican legislature since Robert E. Lee was alive. And now they have, for the first time, a Republican legislature. And you have many new Republican governors as well. And what I'm saying is that there's going to be a new environment now, not just in Washington, D.C., but there's a new environment in state capitals around the country. So one of the things you all need to know as you're devising your new policies is, you know what? These other states are going to be right on your tail. You know, they're going to be doing a lot of the kinds of things that you're talking about. There is competition among states. Now, one of the first issues that you are unquestionably going to have to deal with after you abolish your state income tax is that you're going to have to deal with the health care issue, right, obviously. And, you know, look, I'm not a big fan of Obamacare. I think I give President Obama actually a lot of credit for taking on this issue, because President Obama was exactly right that if we stay on this course that we're on with health care, it will bankrupt every family and every business in America. And so I give him a lot of credit for finally, you know, taking this on. Unfortunately, most of the things that happen in Obamacare, unfortunately, are going to make the health care crisis worse, not better. And you've seen what's happened just in the course of the last couple of months, where many of the insurance companies are saying they're going to have to raise their rates. Many businesses, including McDonald's and Boeing, are saying they're going to have to, you know, reduce the number of benefits they're giving, or even many businesses are talking about having to get rid of their health care plans altogether. So what I'm saying is that the health care crisis has not been solved. We have a brand new health care crisis that's going to have to be dealt with. Now, it's pretty clear to me that when the Republican Congress is sworn in January, that the very first bill that they will pass will be in the House a repeal of Obamacare. But it's not going to be, I think that's a good thing, but it is not going to be repealed in the Senate, probably. And so you're going to get stalemated. And then the question becomes, what happens next? And I think what you're going to see is a kind of death of 1,000 cuts, right, where all sorts of elements of the health care bill, for example, one of the most onerous and I think unconstitutional features of that health care bill is the individual mandate that requires people to buy health insurance. There's nothing in the U.S. Constitution that allows the federal government to mandate someone to buy health insurance. I think that's going to be eliminated. But I guess the long and short of what I'm saying is what Washington is going to do is they're going to throw this issue to you in the states. And this is the right approach. We need to do with health care what we did with welfare reform back in the 1990s. I mean, you remember, Kelly, where we had innovative governors around the country, people like Tommy Thompson and John Engler in Michigan, and I could go on and on down the list, who basically started experimenting with welfare reforms, work for welfare requirements, and other types of reforms that had an incredibly pro-positive impact in terms of reducing welfare caseloads, and not just reducing welfare caseloads, but moving people off of welfare into work. It was one of the greatest social experiments that we've seen in this country in 50 years. That welfare caseloads today are about half of what they were nationwide 15 years ago before we did welfare reform. And the point I'm making is it started right there in the states. And so what we need to do with health care is we need to now allow states to experiment with health care reforms, right? And so this is going to be one of your mandates, is bring down these health care costs through all sorts of things. Now, I would like to see several things. Some of these are federal, some of them are state and local. One of the things I feel so strongly about, one of the complaints that I had with the federal health care legislation, is the idea of allowing 50 states to compete on insurance. Let people buy insurance in any state that they want to, right? Why should we have regulations that says somebody in the state of Georgia can't buy insurance in the Florida or Maine or some other state? That would significantly reduce costs. And then what we need to do, I think, is dramatically expand things like health savings accounts and medical savings accounts that are high deductible plans that can really reduce the cost of health care by injecting the consumer into the equation, right? And you know, we do interviews at the Wall Street Journal all the time with leading CEOs and so on. We do this every Saturday in the paper. And about 3 months ago, I interviewed John Mackey, who's the president of Whole Foods. Do you have Whole Foods stores here in Georgia? And, you know, he has 30,000 employees nationwide, so he's one of the biggest employers in the country. And he provides health care to every single one of his employees. And these are not wealthy, you know, these are grocery store clerks who are not making, you know, huge salaries. And what he told us is that he's able to provide health care to his workers through a health savings account type of system, a wellness program that only costs him about $7,000 per employee. That's amazing, because the average healthcare plan for some of these big companies like General Electric and the union plans, those cost like $18,000, $19,000, $20,000 per employee. And what he showed is that the health statistics for his workers are much better than when they have the conventional insurance. So I would love to see a state like Georgia become one of the first states to allow health savings accounts, write-offs for those types of medical expenses that will make these much more attractive to employers, because we can't afford the course we're on now. I was in Texas just a few weeks ago and speaking to the National Federation of Independent Business group there in Texas. And after the meeting, this gentleman came up to me. He said, you know, Steve, you're so right about what's happening with healthcare expenses. He said, I run 60 restaurants here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He said he has something like on the magnitude of about 3,000 employees. So he's a pretty major employer. And he said that by his calculations, that if they allow Obamacare to take root next year, that bill will cost him $1,100 more per employee. Well, folks, that's a big expense. That we're talking about, you know, $2 or $3 million of additional expenses to this company. Well, what does that mean? That means that company now can't hire as many workers, right? This has a very negative consequence for jobs. And so that, I think, is also a major impetus for reform. I wanted to show you just a couple of charts, if I would, about why these issues are so important. And I think that when we talk about tax policy, because I want to go back to this, I think it is so critical to understand how it is that lower tax rates on businesses and individuals and investment can make a difference in terms of improving an economy and improving tax revenues. And this is one of my favorite charts. It's so simple, but it's so important. These are federal tax laws, but this goes for the states as well. You remember when Ronald Reagan was elected, the highest income tax rate in the United States was 70%, which means that for every additional dollar that was earned, you know, the government got 70 cents and individuals got only 30 cents. And Ronald Reagan quite properly and correctly said that tax rates were so high that they were stulting economic growth and they were reducing business investment and they were sending capital overseas. And so you can see what happened in the Reagan years. The top tax rate in the United States came down from, that's the red line, came down from 70 to 50 to 28%. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? I mean, that's a dramatic reduction in taxes. That meant now people got to keep 72 cents on the dollar, whereas at the beginning of the decade, they could only keep 30 cents on the dollar. And you can see tax rates went a little bit up under Clinton and Bush, and then they went down a little bit under George W. Bush. But over the whole period, you can see tax rates came down by about half, from 70% to 35%. Now, here's what's interesting about this chart. Look at the blue line. And these numbers must be right, Scott, because they come from the Tax Foundation, right? This is the top 1%, and the share of taxes paid by the 1%, the top 1%, the evil 1%, the people like, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and Tiger Woods and Lady Gaga and people like that, right? And look at what happened. Look at what happened to the share of taxes paid by the richest 1%. This is an amazing graph. The share of taxes doubled from 19% to 40% paid by the richest 1%, even as their tax rate came down. Now, what is the relevance of this? Well, one piece of relevance to this is we had better make sure that we extend all the Bush tax cuts next January 1st, right? This is a mandatory thing to get this economy growing. But the other point I would make is if we want to get the economy moving, if you want to grow revenues, if we want to balance the budget in Washington and you want to balance your budget here in Atlanta, you've got to promote growth. You've got to have more rich people. And I wanted to show you this chart, this graph, because, sir, when you go forward with your tax reform commission here that you've been charged with, I hope that you keep this in mind. And this is one of the great quotes of the last 50 years from John F. Kennedy. And John F. Kennedy said this, by the way, 3 months before he was tragically assassinated in Dallas. And he said this at the New York Economics Club. And I want to read it to you because it's such an important economic insight. John F. Kennedy said, "It is a paradoxical truth that tax rates are too high today and tax revenues are too low." And then this is the part I love. And he said, "And the soundest way to raise the revenues in the long run is to cut the rates now." Now, that is exactly right. And that's what we need to be doing in Washington, and we need to be doing it in states like Georgia. And so this is really a critical piece to the puzzle about bringing jobs back to your state. One other point I wanted to make, and again, this chart comes from my friends at the Tax Foundation as well. People say, well, look, the rich aren't paying their fair share of taxes, right? They can afford to pay more taxes. This is amazing. The blue line is the share of taxes paid by the top 1%. That's the same chart I just showed you. The red line is the share of taxes paid by the bottom 95%. And look at what happened in 2007. Isn't this the first time this has ever happened, Scott, in history? That the top 1 out of 100 now pay more in income taxes than the bottom 95 out of 100. The point I'm making is we have a steeply progressive tax system now, and this kind of soak the rich idea, I think, is a cancer in the public discussion about health care. I want to bring up two other quick issues, and then if we have some time, I want to take some questions for you. First of all, let me bring up, if I may, the issue of this cap and trade legislation, because I know this has been moving in a lot of states. Obviously, we had a big debate about this in Washington, D.C., and I don't know how many of you saw, but California had a big referendum on there, and you know this, Bob, because you're a refugee from California. But California actually is one of the first states to actually impose cap and trade on itself. So they're basically imposing this massive new energy tax on themselves. Now, look, I know that people have very different opinions about the global warming issue. I'm not a big believer that global warming is the crisis that a lot of people are. But it doesn't matter. No matter what your position is on global warming, for a state to pass a cap and trade bill is economic suicide, right? It's economic suicide because no state can do anything to reduce global carbon emissions, right? You can reduce your own carbon emissions, but let's look at what's happened in California. So California has put in place this cap and trade bill on their own industries. It's a massive energy tax. What do you think has happened as a consequence of that? Well, I'll tell you what's happened. They haven't reduced carbon emissions, but you know what they have done? They've reduced businesses and they've reduced jobs because those businesses that were emitting carbons, trucks, factories, manufacturing plants, they've moved out of California and they've moved to other states or they've moved abroad. You know, when we were debating the federal cap and trade legislation, you know what my subtitle for cap and trade is? The China and India Full Employment Act, right? Because all we're going to do is move factories out of the United States. So it's more important than ever that states don't do this on your own. If there's going to be any solution to global warming, it obviously has to be something that everybody agrees to all over the world, or you're just going to get cheaters and all the businesses are going to go to those places. So that's an important one to remember, that these environmental issues have to be dealt with, in my opinion, more on a national level than on a state level. I think the last thing I wanted to say to you is you're going to see the federal government, you're going to see this Congress hand to you more power than you've ever seen, hopefully. Because one of the things, when I talk to the Republicans in Congress, and I know a lot of these new people who've been elected, they basically believe, and I think most of you would agree with this, right? We have spent too much money, we've borrowed too much money, we have printed too much money, and we have taken too much power from the states. Would you all agree with that as an operating premise? And so if you look at what's happened over the course of the last 2 years, just to give you a sense of how wrong things have gone, we have spent in Washington to try to put out this recession $2 trillion. $2 trillion. That is an astonishing thing. The budget that had been passed by this Congress, if we don't stop it and put us on a new fiscal course in Washington, we will borrow $10 trillion over the next 10 years, which is more money than the federal government borrowed from 1776 to 2005. Those are frightening numbers, aren't they? I saw this bumper sticker the other day that I just loved, and it said, "Thank God Nancy Pelosi doesn't know what comes after a trillion." And I thought, whew, thank God she doesn't, because what is it, a gazillion? I mean, how much money do these people want to spend? And part of the problem is we're spending so much money in Washington that the numbers have become unfathomable, haven't they? I mean, there's a saying now that a trillion is the new billion. And it really is true. And if I was trying to tell I have 3 kids. I have 2 teenagers who I'm not too fond of, but I like my 9-year-old still. And so one night, I thought I'd tell my 9-year-old a little story about, when I'm at home, I try to tell him a bedtime story every night. And so one night, I thought I'd tell him kind of a scary story. So I thought I'd tell him a little something about the national debt, since after all, he's going to have to repay this. So I said, David, do you know how much money $1 trillion is? He looked at me with his eyes glazed over, and I said, well, let me ask you a question you probably do know the answer to. I said, well, who's the greatest basketball player in the world? And he instantly said, LeBron James. And so I said, well, how much money does LeBron James get to play basketball? And he knows this. He knows everything about the NBA. And he said he knows that at the Miami Heat contract that LeBron James signed for with his contract and his endorsements, he's going to make $40 million next year playing basketball. That's a pretty good salary, right, to play hoops, $40 million. And so I posed this question to my son David, and I'll pose the same one to you. How many seasons do you think LeBron James would have to play basketball at $40 million a year to have $1 trillion? 25,000 seasons. 25,000 seasons at $40 million a year gets you $1 trillion. So the point I'm making is, don't follow the lead of Washington. There is this kind of economically poisonous idea that government spending creates jobs, right? That was what the economic stimulus was about and so on, and it didn't work. Don't do that in Georgia. Don't think that when you spend money, you're actually creating jobs. Now, you may be doing good things with the money. Obviously, you need to have construction projects for roads, and you need good schools and so on. But don't waste money and think that somehow you're creating jobs with that. It doesn't work. And the way that the way to think about this, and this is a really simple economic concept that nobody in Washington understands, but Milton Friedman taught us this. What was it, 30 or 40 years ago? There ain't no such thing as a free lunch, right? If Washington or the state of Georgia spends $1, that dollar has to come from somewhere. I don't think there are any kids in this room, so I can say this to this audience. There's no tooth fairy out there, right, passing out free money. And this has been the tragedy of what we've done in Washington. Every dollar that we've spent, we've taken that money, right, Joe, out of the pockets of the private businesses and the private workers and the families. And that doesn't create prosperity. So do not follow that model. Spend your money very wisely and frugally. One last point, and then, Kelly, if we have some time, I will open up to questions. I want you to think about this. This is just big picture thinking. We should be doing big picture thinking right now because we're at the kind of cusp of this, hopefully, this public policy revolution. I believe the number one issue for our country, and you put it so well, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, that you were talking about making Georgia the capital, the financial and growth capital of this country. What we need to, the number one issue for our country is not global warming and all these other things. It is this for our children. What country in the next 10 years and 20 years and 30 and 50 years, what country is going to be the global economic superpower? For all of our lives, for everybody in this room, for our lives, the United States has been the unquestioned economic superpower, right? And we have been a force for good. We have led the world in technology, in job creation, and prosperity. We've led the world in every important category. But now, for the first time in any of our lifetimes, we have an honest-to-goodness rival. And who is that? China, right? And you've seen what's happened in China. If you want to see the virtues of free market capitalism, look at what's happened in China over the course of the last 25 years. It's one of the great miracles of human history. This is a country that for hundreds and thousands of years couldn't even feed itself, where people died of starvation, now is becoming one of the most prosperous countries in the world. And I'll tell you the story. About a year ago, we met with the economic minister from China, who's, at the Journal, we get to meet with all these, muckety-mucks at all these, these foreign countries. And this guy was the number 4 guy in the chain of command in Beijing. So he's a very powerful guy, and he came into our offices and he was talking about how well the Chinese economy has been doing, 10, 11% compounded rates of growth per year for 25 years. And he said to us, he predicted, and this was a year ago, he said, by the end of this year, he said, we will surpass Japan, and we will then be the 2nd largest economy in the world. How many of you saw, by the way, that happened, right? China, this is maybe the most important economic story of the last 20 years. China is now the 2nd largest economy in the world. It happened. And then this gentleman said something that really kind of frightened me and it kind of stuck in my craw. He said, by our models, in 18 to 20 years, we're going to catch the United States. And he said, and once we catch you people, we're just going to leave you in a cloud of dust. I mean, he didn't quite say it like that, but that's the way it came out. And, you don't all know me very well, but you cut me and I bleed red, white, and blue. I just love this country, and I think we're as Ronald Reagan said, it was divine inspiration that put us here. And so I couldn't take this much longer. So I said, Minister, with all due respect, I mean, what you've done in China has been an incredible achievement, and I want to salute you for this. But China is not going to overtake the United States anytime in my lifetime, sir. And the reason, with all candor, that that's not going to happen is because our Chinese are so much smarter than your Chinese. he didn't like that very much, right? But there's a serious point. There is a serious point to this story, which is China, and this is something I hope you all, every legislator in this room who's got such an important public charge now, keep in mind in everything that you do over the next couple of years, that China right now is focused like a laser beam on competitiveness, right? I mean, how many of you have been to China in this room? I mean, what's happening there is incredible. All they think about is they're hyper-obsessed with being competitive, right? How do they become the number 1 in manufacturing, agriculture, aeronautics, medical, pharmaceutical, defense industries? They have their eye on the ball. And that's what we need to do as a nation, and that's what you need to do in Georgia, is make sure that everything that you do, and this is specifically for the lawmakers in this room, everything that you do, make sure that you're keeping in mind, is this going to make Georgia a more competitive state? If you do that, and if we do that at the national level, we're going to see the biggest economic boom we've ever seen in our nation's history. Thank you very much for being here, and Kelly, thank you for inviting me. Kelly says we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions, and then I have to run. Joe, I'm not going to take a question from you. All right, go ahead, Joe.
Pork barrel, do you think the Republicans will stand up on pork barrel spending and gun spending?
Well, this is the important thing. And this is why I said, Joe, and I really mean this, this victory that we saw on Tuesday for the Republicans, this was not a Republican victory. This was a victory for the Tea Party people and the conservative movement and the independents in this country who are sick of both parties, quite frankly. Any Republican in this room, I know there are a lot of Republican lawmakers. If you think the public and the voters are in love with you people, you got it all wrong, I guarantee you. I mean, if you look at the polls, people are still angry at both parties, Joe. I'm still angry at both parties. I mean, for my Democratic friends in this room, the Republicans are the one who spent us into this crisis. Let me show you something. I mean, you got me started now, Joe, but this stuff makes me really angry. I mean, I'm going to show this to you for the Democrats in here. Look at this. This is, you can see under, in the 90s, this is the budget. In the 90s, the budget was level. We had a Republican Congress and a Democratic president. It didn't get any better than that, right? Joe, look at what happened in 2001 when we had a Republican president, Republican Congress, Republican Senate. The spending went through the roof. How many of you ever heard of the Bridge to Nowhere in Alaska? Raise your hand. I wrote the first editorial on that. This was my scoop. For those of you who don't know about this project, $200 million to build a bridge in a small town in Alaska with 50 people. We could have purchased a Learjet for everybody on that island, and been cheaper than building that damn bridge. And that was a symbol of all of this excessive spending you're talking about, Joe. So now look what happens. President Obama comes in, and what does he do? He doesn't bring spending down. It goes up by another $1 trillion. And so we've got both parties now fighting with each other. I mean, it's almost like none of them learned the lesson from the other end. Republicans, it's such an important question you asked me. I will make this prediction to you because there's a big vote on Tuesday about earmarks in the Republican caucus. And if those senators do not vote to ban earmarks, people are going to be so angry. And if the Republicans don't get this spending under control, 2 years from now, either one of two things are going to happen, Joe. The Democrats will then retake power, or we're going to have a third party in this country of Tea Party people, because people will not continue to tolerate this failure of these parties. The people want fiscal responsibility, fiscal restraint, and pro-growth tax policies. I got to go in about 2 minutes, so let me just tell you, I'm going to tell you one last story, if I may, Kelly. And this explains the whole difference between the two political, the problem with our two political parties. So I'm going to insult the Republicans and the Democrats in this room. I'm going to be bipartisan for a minute. All right. So this is the story of the two young boys, the 7 and 6-year-old, and they're going to go down for breakfast one morning, and the 7-year-old says to the 6-year-old, when we go downstairs for breakfast this morning, let's each say a curse word to Mom. So they start giggling, and the 7-year-old says, I'm going to say the word hell to Mom, and you say the word ass to Mom. So they're giggling. They go downstairs for breakfast. The mom says to the 7-year-old boy as he sits down at the kitchen table, son, what would you like for breakfast this morning? And the 7-year-old quite cleverly says, what the hell, Mom? I think I'll have Cocoa Krispies. Well, the mother explodes in anger. She's so angry, she reaches across that kitchen table. She grabs that little boy, his scrawny little neck. She's strangling him. His eyes are bulging out. She throws him in the corner of the room. He collapses in a heap. She says, you go upstairs and you never, ever use that kind of language in this house again. So he goes upstairs moaning, and meanwhile, the 6-year-old had been watching this Mount St. Helens eruption from his mother, and now he's in a state of terror, and the mother can barely control her anger. She sticks her finger right in that little boy's face and says, and you son, what do you want for breakfast this morning? He's so afraid, he's terrified, he's stammering. He says, well, Mom, I'm not really sure, but you can bet your sweet ass it ain't Cocoa Krispies. And that's... right? That's our two parties, right? One party screws up, and then the next party comes in and does the wrong thing again, learns all the wrong lessons. So this is why, my last point, this is why groups like Georgia Policy Foundation are so important. They're kind of the guiding light. They are the path to prosperity, and also, don't forget to read the Wall Street Journal editorial page every morning. Thank you very much for having me, folks.
Well, thank you, Steve Moore. You certainly lived up to expectations. What a great speech and a great way to get us fired up for the rest of the day. Our panel sessions will be starting again in about 10 minutes, and we're adjourned. Thank you.